Woo! Here we are. We made it. Wasn't
Happy
sure we were
Friday,
going
everybody.
to. Happy Friday. First Friday in May. Ah,
My mom's birthday. So,
Oh,
mom, if you're out there,
shout
Midge,
out.
happy birthday.
Yes.
well, I don't know about you, but sometimes my parents watch this. Every once in a while, I'll get a note afterward if I've talked about my. I leave my mom out of it, but I talk about my dad because we give each other a hard time.
He can handle it.
He can. One time, when we go visit, my kids drink 2% milk, and my dad will only drink whole milk. And one time, I wrote on the 2% milk, "Dad, don't drink this," and it was only so that he wouldn't mix up the whole milk and the 2% because he hates 2%. So he had my mom write on his milk, "Becky, do not drink this," and put it in big letters.
Amazing.
Because yes. So we have those things going back and forth in our.
I gotcha.
Yeah. Well, happy birthday, Tom's mom. Maybe you can send her a little clip.
I will definitely.
Yeah. Why not? That'll be fun. So, I mean, anything fun this weekend? I don't know if we can talk Taylor Swift. Speaking of, how was it? You did promise us an update.
I did. Yeah, it was amazing.
Did you go in Atlanta?
I did. Yeah. No shocker, but yeah, it was a great night. She's just an amazing performer. Love her. So yeah, we had a really great time, and it was a really amazing concert.
Yeah, I enjoyed I enjoyed Christina Warren's Blue Skies on this. Yeah, I was going to say her feed turned into all T Swift all the time, and I think that is perfectly a good use of a new social medium. Yeah, I was going to say I got shut out of tickets, and of course here in DC, we as of yet do not have the Taylor Swift tour in DC.
Right.
I would have to go to Philadelphia, which I'm
Yeah.
sure is a fine city, but it is it is not my home, and I think it has to do with something that there's no good stadium here. We
Yeah.
only have FedEx Field, which is trash and owned by Dan Snyder, so nobody wants to go there because he'd charge you like $20 just to look at him.
Tell us how you
So
feel.
I think that's a fair amount of it. So yeah, all rough, but I'll get past my disappointment.
Come down here. We have so many great venues here. I went to so many of them last year, and Alexa and I were talking earlier this week about how I actually don't have a lot of concerts this summer, and I'm going to have to get on that because we have several great venues. And last year I saw Kiss and Doobie Brothers and a ton of great concerts. And this year it's like I've got something in the fall. And that's it. So
It was actually, yeah, Becky, you were at concerts, I feel like all the time last week, and I wasn't. And then, yeah, I went to Taylor Swift on Saturday, and then we went to a Beatles tribute band on Wednesday this week, which was also amazing. It was the Rain tribute. They did Abbey Road and the rooftop concert, and it was really fun.
Nice. Very nice. No, I have the Mavericks in the fall.
Nice.
But instead I'm thinking of there's a bunch of musicals, traveling musicals coming through. I may have to substitute that. Traveling Wicked, Chicago, and Les Mis are all coming to DPAC, which is a really nice venue here. I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson last year at DPAC, so maybe this year it'll be the summer of musicals.
All good things.
Yeah,
So
why not?
where do we want to start this week? There's a lot that happened.
So much going on. So I guess we will start with the usual. We'll do community and then meetups. We have a lot of product stuff going on. We've got some webinars that we were going to talk about, and Tom's got some cool stuff. Yeah. Is this part of your X world, or is this completely new?
So this is actually part of the X World talk, and it's also part of the talk I'm going to give at Penn State this summer. So, there's a lot of bits and bobs. It's all there's an arc of talks. If you saw it at X World, it will be better at Penn State and better again when we get to Max Sysadmin in October. So this is a talk that has 3 stages. We have gone through the first stage. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm only going to do part of this talk because I want to tease it for Penn State, but especially because there's new knowledge here this week about Apple's rapid security response updates, including some information that I don't think has been published yet. So I'm really excited. I've got some. I've got the hots for everybody. In terms of the hot research. So this is fresh off the presses.
Now, where's the one in October?
The one in October will be in Gothenburg, Sweden at MacSysAdmin. And so MacSysAdmin.se. And they are one of I think they are the second longest running Apple admins conference, which is, I think it started in 2006. The previous year was the first year of XWorlds, which is the longest running one, and they're in Australia. So we'll be excited to put all those things together and have some great conference talks this summer and fall.
Well, we've definitely been talking about PSU and what we're going to do there. I've been talking to our CMO about swag and things like that. I'm trying to do some convincing. So cross your fingers there on what we can get done. So I'm trying. I really am trying to figure out what we can take with us and do some cool swag. So let's hope. All right. With that, let's jump into what's going on. So in the community, lots of updates. We didn't really, we talked about some last week, but there are so many more. We each month have been posting our jump shots, which is our newsletter. We've got one for product and MSP. David posted those. So if you want to keep up to date on what's going on, go check those out. A couple of new blogs, Time, a Social Construct, and Keeping It Fresh. I think both of those were by Pam this time. So go take a look at those. We'll put those links in the recap. A ton of scripts. Very, very meaty. Yum. A bunch of PowerShell stuff going on. Jurgen has been busy, and our friend of the show, Joe, also put some in. So Joe put in experimenting with new JC policy, set JC policy, create and update Jump Cloud policies with the PowerShell module. We know how much everyone loved it when Joe was on showing the policies and PowerShell. So check that out. And then we've got PowerShell function, get system report with details, how to create a new user group with custom reply attributes for Radius, and experimenting with Jump Cloud PowerShell module in combination with PowerShell AI module. So lots of those to go take a look at. Oh, and if you want to help a friend, someone had a question about what does it look like for end users when the password requirements change. So if you want to share, I can have one of our people do it, but if you want to help someone out as a community member, we would like you to jump in and do it first instead of us going and answering the question. So we'll post that link. And with that, Alexa, meetups.
Yeah. Just a small reminder, this week we've got the Raleigh meetup coming up the week after next, I think it is. Yeah, May 16th. And we're going to be at the Umstead Hotel, Restaurant and Bar, and it's going to be a good time. Yeah, the Raleigh group always has a pretty good turnout. Becky does a really great job recruiting, and she's really tied in with the North Carolina Tech Association. So yeah, we're looking forward to that one.
It's really good. It's a really nice place. It's right next to this beautiful area where there's lots of walking trails and stuff. They have a patio that overlooks, lots of trees and things, and the food is awesome. So you definitely want to come to that if you're local.
Sure.
All right. And let's see. All right. Product releases.
Oh, we got a bunch of those this week.
Yes, we do.
I'm excited to talk about that. A couple of these came from our teams over in the devices wing of Jump Cloud. The first of those is that Silent Assist is now available. If you've been testing out our Remote Assist product, you may have noticed that we were doing this with a long string that you had to get from the other side of the user of the connection, and for security reasons and for consent reasons. One of the things that we realized is that, hey, maybe that's not the best way to do this, and we knew that from the start. We wanted to try and get something out the door so that folks can test the experience. We did have the release of this week. I think Thursday was when it finally hit production for most of our customers, of both Prompted Assist, where you can ask a user to consent to a remote desktop session, as well as for the Silent Assist, which is where you can take direct control of an individual system, and the user will be allowed to help you control the system at that point, as well as be in charge of the end user experience there, which means they can end that session or prevent you from controlling the system in the event that there's sensitive data involved. So, but you will be able to start those sessions and do those kind of things in an appropriate way, and we're really excited about how that changes the landscape here, so that you've got multiple different modules here available as an admin for remote control of an individual device. So we're really excited that went to production, and we'll have Neeraj here, I think next week, is that right, for the IT Hour, going through the whole thing. So that'll be spectacular. And then in just a couple of weeks, Scott Reed is going to join us here on the IT Hour to talk about Windows MDM, which we also brought into production yesterday. The first part of that is seamless onboarding based on the user portal for individual users, so that you no longer need to distribute the binary and the connect key. All of those things are not important. You'll be able to, just from the click of a browser button on a Windows system, enroll that system in JumpCloud and establish the MDM control of that individual system. This is just the start. We do want to give you full control of all of your Windows devices and allow you to connect those devices over the MDM channel that Windows 10 and Windows 11 provide. And so we'll have an option there where you can actually convert your JumpCloud agent based enrollment into a JumpCloud MDM based enrollment out of the admin portal. And we'll have a full roadmap presentation as we get into this on towards the end of the month here on the IT Hour. But that largely completes our story here in terms of becoming a UEM. This is really JumpCloud's coming out party in a lot of ways. We are now an MDM for Mac OS and Windows and iOS and iPad OS, as well as Android. So Android EMM coming up fast. We'll have a lot of more things to talk about next week there. So lots of exciting.
Scott will be here on the 26th at the end of the month, and we always like having Scott on here, and Neeraj as well. So Neeraj will be here next week for the Silent Assist, and we know everyone has really been looking forward to that. So we are definitely excited to share that.
For sure.
Frank is asking about a link for the passkey stuff. So
I will find that for you. Yeah, but Google is and we'll talk about this more in the news session. I think let's leave that for the news part.
Yeah. Alexa, we have some upcoming webinars. Lots going on there.
Yeah. So in addition to some exciting IT hours coming up, we also have a few really great webinars coming up. So the first is IT stress management. So that is kind of in honor of this month is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we wanted to put together a webinar just to help with some mindfulness strategies, tips for preventing stress and burnout, all the things. And we have a really great guy coming in to do it. We have Alexis Santos. He is a teacher at the 10% Happier podcast, which is an amazing podcast. And he also, let me get this right, he is a co-founder of Open Door Meditation Community. So he's really great. And actually, Tom will be facilitating that conversation. So you won't want to miss it. That is May 18th. And Becky, if you don't mind dropping the link to that one in the chat, I will start to talk about the next one. So we've teased the roadmap webinars we have coming up. So the first one we have coming up is the product roadmap webinar. That is going to be May 23rd. So that is geared toward direct, talking about Android EMM, Windows MDM, all the things kind of that Tom has touched on, faster onboarding with attribute-based group actions, things like that. So that is May 23rd. And then on May 24th, we have the partner roadmap webinar. So that is geared towards the MSP audience, partner focused capabilities, including MTP enhancements, PSA integrations, and deeper remote assist functionality, and much, much more. So those are all coming up. They're going to be great. And we hope to see you there.
Yeah, super excited for the product roadmap conversation there. I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And we might even have some follow-ups on the IT hour if necessary after those
Mhm.
roadmap
For sure.
webinars. We're always happy to do those, to dive in deeper or do some demos. Those are always fun. Well, now that we've gotten all that out of the way, Tom, rapid security response.
Yeah. So, I was nerdy and I prepared some slides because that's what I do. Let me see. I think I can share my screen here. I just got to find the right button. So give me just 2
I know
seconds.
it moved. It's down at the bottom now.
Yeah, it did. I was going to say they moved it someplace else and they're like, oh, share slides. But then that's like upload a PowerPoint. And I'm like, friends, we use Google here. And there's a lot of good stuff going on with Google. Right. So, from this perspective, I think that this is an interesting thing for us to talk about as a group because, we've got to talk a little bit about how the Apple platform works, but to understand how rapid security response updates work. And so Apple was in a bit of the news here for releasing this new kind of update. And I kind of want to talk a little bit first on how Apple devices update, generally speaking. So this is, again, part of a longer talk. It's part of a talk called Software Update, where we're going, where we've been. It's also been known as Software Update, Threat or Menace. Software Update, Discovery D2, Electric Boogaloo. Software Update on the Apple platforms is a complicated topic that, has some challenges and some sharp edges. And so I kind of want to talk about how the Apple platforms update before I dive into what RSRs are and how they function. So if we think about this from the perspective of, I want to focus on the Apple platform that I love best, which is my Macs. Obviously, the iOS devices are more numerous. They also have fewer sharp edges when it comes to updating software updates. And so I'll talk a little bit about the difference between the two when we get into the content here. But I want to focus on how to Macs update in 2023. And so I'm going to flash a couple of links up on the screen here. This is the link to Apple's Platform Deployment Guide, which is a phenomenal resource that every Mac admin should have bookmarked. And if you have to deal with Apple devices, you should really be reading these kind of things. And I'll also throw up that Apple has the Platform Security Guide, which has a lot of different security information here as well. So please take a look at those things, have them bookmarked because they're where a lot of this information lives. When it comes to understanding Apple updates, you need to understand that there are, traditionally 4 kinds of updates. And we'll talk about RSR because it's the 5th version of this. You have an update, which is a minor release of macOS. To go from macOS 13.2.1 to 13.3 is an update. It is not an upgrade. It is meant as an update to the operating system here. When you are staying within the same major version of the operating system and just updating those minor things to the right of the first period, that's an update. An upgrade is a major release of macOS that allows you to go from macOS 12 to macOS 13. In addition, we also have over-the-air updates, which are updates that do not require the entire monolithic installer of macOS. If you're using macOS 12.3 and later, chances are you're going to be using over-the-air updates. You get specific data. It's the specific data necessary to go from a current version to a newest version of the operating system. And those, some people call them Delta updates. Some people call them, other things along those lines. But this is really intended as an over-the-air update. It gives you just the bits you need to go from where you are to the most recent version of the operating system. So if you're going to macOS 13.3.1 today and you're coming from macOS 13.1, you'll get an over-the-air update. If you're coming from macOS 12.4 or 12.5 or 12.6 to 13.3.1, you will also get an over-the-air update that gets you just what you need to get to the most recent version of the operating system. In addition, there are what are called Universal Mac Assistant or UMA updates. And those are the traditional app-driven updates to the operating system. You get a monolithic binary that is an application that you run that handles the upgrade of the operating system. So those are some of the key vocabularies here. We also now have a rapid security response update, which is Apple's way of fixing a problem within the operating system that doesn't exist within the kernel space. This is something that's more application based. So think of those as the native applications that ship with your device. So here, if there was a security flaw in the Maps app or Safari, or an app that you don't get from the App Store, like Keynote or Power or excuse me, Pages or Sheets, Numbers. You will get those in what's called a Cryptex and a rapid security update. And so that just replaces that individual binary. So why do we need to do things this way? I think that's the most important process. When we think about the update process itself, there are a couple of different ways that you can trigger this update process. Apple has one for system settings. Here you can see what this looks like. They open up system settings, they go to general. There's an update available. The user clicks the button. They are prompted for their username and password, which allows the disk to be unlocked. And that's what allows them to go through the update process and complete the update process. There's also a way of doing this through mobile device management for Apple devices. And here at JumpCloud, we've got a way to do this for macOS devices. Here you can see this is a system that's on macOS 13.0.1. There's a version that's available for it that's up next, 13.1. And you can pick an install action and schedule that update. This relies upon the Bootstrap token that JumpCloud escrows when you register that device with JumpCloud. And that's what allow us to start the update process and go through that update process and get to the other side, whether or not the user has been involved in that process. There's also a way to do this via terminal. Software update is a command that's been available to you for quite some time on macOS, going back all the way to 10.2. And so, you look at software update, it'll give you a list of the available updates, and then you can install those updates from the command line. This is a method that is largely out of favor for a number of reasons, most of which have to do with the fact that software updates binary as itself is maybe not the best way to do this task. And it's certainly, kind of a goofy way to handle this in 2023. This should be a last resort for you. So once you have the update in hand on the device, you've downloaded the multiple gigabytes of installer or the smaller version for an RSR, your system has to go through the updating process. So how does that work? Your device is going to go through this personalization process. And this applies to any macOS device running with an Apple Silicon chip. It also applies to any Apple device with a T2 coprocessor if it has an Intel processor. And so this is any MacBook Pro from 2018 forward is going to have one of those T2 coprocessors. We're talking about hardware from the last 4 or 5 years. And so when we think about that, what we have here, you've got to go through a process to securely update the operating system. You might have noticed that there's a personalization phase here. This is where your device goes through its operating system and gives to Apple a specific set of information associated with that device's current state. Gives you, some measurements of the iBoot section, the measurements of the kernel, the measurements of the anti-replay value, and the individual processor ID, which is that ECID that's there. That goes up to an Apple authorization server, and then the operating system receives a signed authorization response, which it stores on disk. And so that at that point, that value is what it uses to apply the update successfully and make sure that it is only applied to that device and that it's not applied to another device. So I want to stop here and say that there's a big footnote here. In order to do that authorization action as part of the personalization process, you need to make sure that you're allowing your devices to send traffic to and from Apple. You should not attempt to inspect SSL or TLS traffic to or from Apple. You should not block outbound connections to Apple. And if you've got a proxy involved on your network, you should skip it for this Apple traffic. In addition, it's really important to know that content caching with, for example, JumpCloud's content caching policy, which we make available to our MDM, allows you to store some of these updates on your local network. And so, that's a perfectly fine way to limit the bandwidth that's required to do these updates, especially if you have a large fleet and a very small internet connection. You can do these kind of things with content caching. And I also want to point out that there is a knowledge base article on Apple's site on using Apple products on enterprise network. And that's the URL and that QR code right there. It is not a Rickroll. It takes you directly to article HT 2160. And so that article is up to date and allows you to go through that process, and understand and provide this to your network admins. Hey, this is what I expect for Apple Traffic Cover. So I have to cover a little bit of history. I promise I'm not going to get too boring here, but it's really important that you understand that there's a bit of history that needs to be involved here. What's past is prologue, right? OS 10, 10.11, El Capitan, introduced the concept of system integrity protection, which was the file system would not let you write to some directories. Even if you were root, you could not write to or from these directories. They are part of the operating system that is just for Apple. And so this introduction with macOS, OS 10 El Capitan, it gives the operating system some control over itself, so that malicious parties cannot write to the operating system and make the operating system do things that are unexpected to the end user or unwise for security purposes. In addition, the next version of OS 10, Sierra, introduced the concept of APFS, first for solid state drives. El Capitan, was the last of the HFS Plus operating systems, and Sierra introduces APFS and converts your boot volume if you happen to be booting from a solid state drive. This new APFS set of improvements are substantial, and they allow the Apple to do some very interesting things. When we get to Catalina and macOS 10.15, the operating system is now as part of what's called a volume group, which means that there are two volumes that possess your data. One that is a read-only volume for the operating system, and one that is a read-write volume for literally everything else. And that is how macOS works today. While the original version of this read-only volume could technically be mounted read-write and could technically be changed, it shouldn't be. And macOS 10.15 has some ways of handling unnecessary interaction with those volumes. In this case, also Apple puts the writing on the wall that software catalogs are formally deprecated, and you can no longer use third-party tools to maintain a repository of Apple data related to the operating system patches. All right, slides, go forward. Okay, this is what an APFS container looks like. And if you're familiar with the Macintosh HD volume that lives on your desktop in a lot of cases, or if you've been around at least as long as I have, it did. But the volume group that's contained in there contains that system volume, which is marked as read-only, and a data volume, which has user data and non-Apple applications in it. And they are treated as one file system, which is to say there's one set of paths and two volumes beneath it. This is a distinction that it is largely, irrelevant to the end user at this point. It's only valuable to the admin to understand that there are parts of the operating system that you can write to and parts that you can only read. macOS Big Sur locks down that system volume with a cryptographic seal, which is to say it takes a cryptographically signed checksum of every single file as a rolling up directory all the way up to the bottom of the boot volume, so that at that point you have one cryptographic hash that can be checked and validated at boot time to make sure that the operating system is still the operating system that Apple put down during the update phase. If an attacker were to gain access to the system volume and make changes when the system boots the next time, the system will not pass that cryptographic seal. The volume will be shown as broken, and at that point the operating system will boot into recovery and essentially say, hey, look, I've got a bad operating system right now. I'm not going to continue to boot until such time as you download a fresh version of the operating system and install it on this system. In addition, Big Sur makes an important change, which is that booting is now accomplished by mounting a snapshot, a read-only single-use snapshot for that operating system. And so that at that point, you're not even booted from the bits on disk. You were booted from the bits on disk at that moment of the update, of its last update. And so at that point, even if you were to change the disk and change those files on disk, and even if you were to change it with a signed, key, which again, highly unlikely, you would still be booting from the snapshot that was the update at that point in time. This is highly secure. So here now is a representation that's slightly different. We now have a sealed system volume, which is not just locked, but it's cryptographically sealed in such a way that it makes sure that it's up to date and it stays that way. So, right, updates. We talked too much about history. I need to stay on topic. So when you update the operating system, you're booted from a state where it can make a copy of the snapshot. It can, at that point, unlock the file system, make changes to the sealed system volume, and then create a new seal and a new volume snapshot from that environment. That's what happens when you restart the operating system during a reboot process. When you get the alert that says, hey, you've got an update, time to restart, that's what happens next. And that's what drags the things out a little bit in terms of its time. That's when it unseals the system volume, writes a new update down to that system partition, that system volume within the APFS container. And then at the conclusion of that process, makes a new snapshot and then boots from that snapshot at that time. And so at the end of that process, you end up with a new system volume snapshot, which is great. So there's more here, though. Software update is just as much about hardware as it is about software. And we'll cover that part in the presentation at Penn State. So come back for that part. But I do want to slap in a note real quick here about erase all contents and settings, which is macOS 12 and later single best feature for a Mac admin. Here we have that initial container. This is the operating system that's there. I have that operating system within that blue box, and then I have the data volume, which is my user data and all those non-Apple apps that were installed on my system. Those live within a separate spot on the disk, a separate volume within the volume group. And so what the system does at that point is when you tell it to erase, all it does is remove that partition. It leaves the sealed system volume just as it was, which means when you restart the system, it starts looking around and it's saying, hey, where's my user data? I don't see my user data anyplace. And it's like, oh, right, I've been erased. And then it creates that new data volume, binds it into the volume group, and you're ready to go through Setup Assistant all over again. That's how you can reset the macOS device in approximately 5 minutes and bring it back to a state where it's never been booted and a user's never been put on the machine and apps need to be reinstalled. This is the quickest, fastest, easiest way to take a machine from its current state, wipe it, and get it ready for deployment again. And it's one of those miracle features that's part of software update that I absolutely love. So we've talked about updating the operating system. It's also important that you understand that it's not just how that all works together. You need to, once you've updated the device, boot it again. And secure boot is the underpinning of a secure update process that Apple goes through. And the way that this works with Intel Macs or with T2 chips, the T2 boots first. This is actually a full-on system on a chip that boots by itself ahead of the rest of the operating system. It validates the boot ROM on the system. It validates the bootloader. It validates that kernel cache signature file. And then it validates the UEFI signature file. And it loads EFI at the conclusion of those processes. If any of those parts don't validate out, the boot chain is considered to be tampered with, and therefore you need to revive the operating system starting with the T2 chip. After EFI has loaded, the Intel chip that is powering those Intel-based Macs boots next. It evaluates the boot.efi file, and then that boot.efi process validates the macOS signature that's there. I saw Mike James ask a question in there. Does it stay at the latest update version when you do that reset? Yes, it does, because it's using the existing booted system during erase all contents and settings to go where it needs to go. It just drops away the user file, starts fresh. And so if that system was 13.3.1, it's still 13.3.1. It does not go back to some snapshot from when it was purchased. So that is how that operates today. On the T2 chip itself, These processors upgrade like other Apple Silicon platforms, like the iOS platform, like the Mac OS with Apple Silicon platform. And so they require communication with Apple during that process to validate that they are who they say they are and validate that that update is intended for that device. Apple Configurator 2 is a program that you can get directly from Apple through the App Store and through other places. And it's incredibly valuable for reviving those devices in the event that something goes wrong in a way that's actually recoverable. And so, since they possess an operating system of their very own called Bridge OS, which somehow rudely is not named after me, it gets you to a place where that will power the rest of the hardware and give you that next stage there. Configurator is also incredibly valuable for restoring things after that, restoring devices if something goes wrong. And so if you need to specifically restore to a specific version of Bridge OS, those links are available from that. Macs that have Apple Silicon boot in a slightly different way. There's no first processor to start with. The entire thing is all right there. It's built, you're booting from that entire system on a chip at that point. And so there, the boot ROM validates the low-level booting signature, which in turn, validates the system-paired firmware signature, and then goes through the local policy process, ingests data from the secure enclave, which is a part of the Apple Silicon chip, and you get to a version of macOS at the conclusion here. And again, the Apple Platform Security Guide describes this sequence in incredible detail. And it's really fascinating to go and read. I strongly encourage that everybody to go, find the Apple Platform Security Guide and take a read. It's really fascinating. So when it comes to managing software versions, we have to step through a bunch of different pieces here. In terms of managing this as an admin, you need to start from an MDM. You have to do this, with an MDM. That's really the only way here. And honestly, you probably need something more than an MDM to manage your own software updates. And again, if you want to watch the Xworld talk, I talk a lot about how Nudge works and how Superman works and a bunch of other tools that you can use in concert with the MDM to make those things work. But a big part of this is making sure that you have what you need, and an MDM is required. So how do MDM updates work? Really, what it comes down to is your system goes through this process, and your MDM's part of it. And your MDM says to the device, hey, please do a scan for updates. And the system says, sure, I'll do that. That sounds like fun. And then you have to go back and ask again, what updates do you have? This is not an instantaneous query either. These queries can be delayed by battery status. They can be delayed by network traffic. They can be delayed by any number of things. And you're not going to get an instantaneous result from the end system because it has to go out to talk to Apple to get that information as well. And it will save that for an appropriate moment. So you do have to wait a little bit. We wait about 25 to 30 minutes after asking a device to do to do a scan for updates to actually go and ask it again how many updates are available. And then when you've asked, the system's going to return back to the MDM. I have this array of updates available. And then the MDM can issue a command that says, please install this specific update in this specific way. And the operating system generally I treat it a little bit like asking my 9-year-old to clean his room. There are mixed results in terms of asking this system to do that task. Some ways of asking are better than others, shall we say. Hey, Charlie, will you please clean your room? You might get a new Nintendo game out of it. Works better than, hey, Charlie, go clean your room. And so, if you think about those kind of things, how you ask it to do an update may result in a different response from the individual system. These are the 6 methods that you can ask. Default, download only, install ASAP, notify only, install later, and install force restart. And so, if we think about these kind of things, you can use all of these methods with minor OS upgrades. You can use only 5 of these methods for major OS upgrades. Install later is not currently available to go between major versions of the operating system. So that's something you need to keep in mind. In addition, Apple has introduced the concept of deferrals, where you can essentially allow the end user to defer this operating system update for a number of days, or for a number of requests. because it's not a number of days, it's not time-based. It's the number of times you ask the user, hey, we've got an update for you. We're going to do it tonight. Are you cool with that? And they can say, yes, that sounds like a great idea, or no, I don't want that. And so you can go through those things, and you've got to be able to go through and ask. This key is only supported when you use install later, and it's only available for minor OS updates from 12.x to 12.y or 13.x to 13.y. And it's also important to recognize that install later updates happen entirely out of your control as the admin. Generally speaking, they happen between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. local time if the user's device is plugged into power or has more than 50% battery. And the right phase of the moon is a slight. Nope. I shouldn't get too sarcastic today. However, in some cases, the install later function will work there. James asks an important question. Is there an error log somewhere that shows if an MDM command isn't successful? Yes, there is. You can look on Jump Cloud, for example. We will show you the response from the individual device in that case. So you can see those responses out there. Here, I want to talk for just a couple of quick seconds about Bootstrap tokens and what they're there for. So a Bootstrap token is gathered by your MDM at enrollment time. So when you sign into the MDM for the very first time, we capture as the MDM a Bootstrap token. That Bootstrap token can unlock the system volume. And here you can run diskutil apfs list users / and it's going to show you what key slots are available there. You can see that I have a personal recovery user, which is my volume owner, and I have my MDM Bootstrap token external key, which is my Jump Cloud enrollment at that time. Your Bootstrap token is used by install later when sent via MDM command to unlock the system volume, but not the user data volume, during the quiet period. And that's what allows the operating system to go through that process and do it with, without the user's password having to be entered. And that Bootstrap token is a way of unlocking the system volume at a later date. So the system grabs the escrowed boot key and the escrowed Bootstrap key, stores it in the secure enclave, and uses that during the software update. So all of this has led us, 20 minutes later, to rapid security response. And the question that I have to ask here is, when is an update not an update? RSR updates are new. They were added to macOS with macOS 13 Ventura. We got one test round. I think we got, we got 2 test rounds, one of which you could actually test during the late winter time. The first of these updates shipped on Monday. The update is styled as 13.3.1 space open parentheses A close parentheses. So this is a very intentional choice from Apple's perspective here, so that you can identify a system that has a rapid security response update applied to it, but it should not be considered to be a separate version of the operating system. I know that sounds confusing. It feels confusing to me. I am confused by this. However, I think there are some things that are known about the RSR updates that make this a little bit more understandable. RSR updates can be installed by a user or via their MDM, and RSR updates can be removed by a user. Traditionally, you have not been able to remove a macOS update. There is no rollback function of macOS or iOS. Operating systems only go further. You only go from where you are to where you are next. There is no going. They burn the bridge behind you, as a matter of fact. RSR's changed that model a little bit here. And that letter indicates the number of RSR updates that have been available for this minor version of the operating system. So Apple could ship 13.3.1b today, tomorrow, Monday. Those are all things that are predicated on each other. So you will install 13.3.1a and then 13.3.1b, all the way up to N or Z or AA. All of those things are unlikely at that time. In addition, you have the ability as the admin to control visibility of those RSR updates, so that you can say, hey, look, I don't even want to bother with this. Turn off rapid security response. And that's something you have the ability to do with an MDM restriction setting. In addition, you have the ability to say that those updates are available, but they should not ever be removed from a system. So that you can essentially say, hey, look, put this RSR on that system, and then don't let me take it off again. And that is something you have the right to do as an admin. And so if you were thinking about it from the perspective of, I want to default to the most secure, I would say show them to your users, because they do not respect the Apple delay functions that are built into the operating system's restrictions commands. So in those cases, you cannot, block them from being available except via the MDM command. In addition, I wanted to make it very clear, JumpCloud does support managing RSR updates with a profile. You can set these profile settings. We do have a policy for this. It's managing rapid security response. And you can find that in the admin portal today. In addition, these RSR updates contain special updates for Safari or other Apple applications on iOS or macOS. They do require a reboot to become fully functional. And you'll notice that fully functional is a weird way of saying that, but I'll get to more of that when we talk about the how cryptexes work. These updates are also very, very fast to install, unlike the current updates, because they do not require regenerating the entire cryptographic hash for the operating system. They just require updating the cryptex that is stored on disk associated with with this update. And so because of that, it means it's a very, very rapid process. I think it was 45 seconds and out on my iPhone, and I think it was just a minute or so on my macOS device. And so when you install these updates, it's very, very rapid. So they're not very disruptive in this case, which is great. But the way these updates ship, you'll notice that they're smaller. They're in the tens of megabytes, not the hundreds of megabytes for the most part, or even the gigabyte range, which is what many of the minor updates are. That's because they only contain a very small part of the operating system that is separate from the rest of the kernel space. These are for updates that happen outside of the lowest layer of the operating system. That's why I mentioned that the thought process here was Safari or the Maps app or Contacts or Calendar or any other spots here. And so those pieces of the operating system are stored in what are called cryptexes, which stands for cryptographic extension images. They're a special kind of disk image that has a cryptographic seal. You can't mount it on your own. There's none of those. This is for the operating system to manage and not for you. In that case, you can update that cryptex on that volume and go from there. You'll have a lot to look at in that space. It's really exciting. There's a lot of good, cool technology that's here. And if you want to read more about cryptexes, there's a fair amount of the Apple Platform Security Guide that focuses on how iOS uses them, specifically some of the security devices that are available for iOS that you can use to take a look at those. So this is what it looks like in JumpCloud when we show you how to do an RSR. And so here you've got macOS Security Response A for 13.3.1. It's a minor update. The build number on the other side is 22E772610A. And you can actually generate an install action for a given device at that point. So who are these for? I think that the best key for looking at all of this is looking at the introduction of lockdown mode for macOS and iOS. Apple provided an optional security mode for the Apple space called Lockdown. And Lockdown prevents access to certain parts of the operating system. It prevents access to certain applications and tools. It's a great way to really focus your security response on the device and say, hey, look, this device is going to do less now, but it's going to be a lot more secure. And when you're under attack from like nation state groups or actors, that are hired by nation state groups, you may have a different security profile than everybody else. And I think that's a very valid way of approaching the rapid security response updates. These are for your most vulnerable users who might be under target of, the most serious hacking that's out there. This is not for marketing director or anybody else that's out there. It's for your most secure users and the users whose security can't wait for the next version of the operating system. So when we think about rapid security response, I want to talk about some of the limitations of rapid security response. This is an update of limited utility, but when you need it, you need it. If you're supporting a rocket company, for example, and your CEO is, that. I think that you can get to a spot where nation states have opinions about how you operate, and they might want to subject you to additional scrutiny. And I think that that is the kind of place that I start to go with. Hey, I want to make sure that those people are safe. I used to do some consulting for a financial services company that specialized in banking regulations in the era of post 9/11. Right, like all of the additional banking regulations that you need to go through as a bank. Because of that, some of their executives were targeted by nation state actors, where maybe the nation state involved couldn't access the normal banking system because they were under sanction. They were constantly under attack. They had YubiKeys for everything. Those are the kind of users that you need to think of with RSRs. In addition, these updates have a very limited lifespan. As soon as Apple goes from 13.3.1a to 13.2, no one will ever be served the 13.3.1a update ever again. That update is now part of macOS 13.3.2 or 13.4 or whatever they release next. These updates have an incredibly limited lifespan. So think about it from that perspective as well. Also, from what I understand, RSR updates don't go through the same flow of QA, of build processes, of automated testing as the point release updates like 13.3.1 go through. So if you're a little bit nervous about those kind of things, I think that that's valuable for you to think about in terms of that process. So be aware that that is something that you should consider also. We also get very, very limited information about these updates. Apple has not disclosed the contents of the 13.3.1a update. We don't know what CVE this protects against. We don't know what risk this protects against. That's a really difficult spot to be in as an admin. And I hope that Apple will reconsider that at some point, where they can provide some, decent knowledge on what's contained in these updates. Because you're going in and you're just essentially saying, hey, Apple, I'm trusting you. Of course, we do that every day. Every day we boot up a Mac or an iPhone, we're trusting in the Apple engineering platforms. We're trusting in their environment. However, it does feel a little bit weird to be making, software push management updates without any concept of what's happening under the hood. So I do think it would be valuable for Apple to consider some baseline guidance here on those kind of things. I think that would be valuable. In addition, these updates are a limited application. This only applies to non-kernel space changes. A researcher recently did an examination of all of the security CVEs that were fixed in the last versions of macOS 13 and came up with only just one or two that would have been fixable with these rapid security response updates. So if they are fixing it now, that shows that they cared enough to deliver it, but they're not telling us why, for example. And I think that's something admins need to think about. So that's where I'm going to stop for today. I'm going to say to be continued. Come see the rest of this talk when I'm at MacAdmins Penn State in July. You can register for the conference at macadmins.psu.edu, and there will be a robust Jump Cloud contingent there. And I'll have a longer session here, not just about rapid security responses, but the changes that Apple has made with the next version of macOS, which will be announced in June. So, or at least I hope will be announced in June. Obviously, until it's been announced, I certainly know nothing about it, and can't comment there. But I'm really hopeful that there's going to be a lot more there for us to talk about, and we can go through that process and see some more cool things there. So that's rapid security response updates. So, Frank, no, I won't send around these slides until they're produced. However, you can find a version of this talk at tombridge.com. The rapid security response updates, I'll try and put into a community update on community.jumpcloud.com for early next week.
We also do post this recap on the community, so you can always rewatch whenever you'd like, Frank.
Awesome. Wow. Well, we've got 5 minutes. We could do a couple of quick headlines. I know you like to get your snark out, so let's see
Tom getting a snark out?
What?
All of us.
Okay.
All of us. Especially Rob and Brett and
Jeff.
a few others. Let's see. Where do we start? Oh, let's start with FTC. The FTC says we must regulate AI. And they say they're well equipped to handle AI collusion, fraud, and privacy concerns. Oh, I didn't know the FTC was getting into comedy.
About that local sports franchise.
On Wednesday, the FTC chair, Lena Khan, pledged to use existing laws to regulate AI in a New York Times op ed. We must regulate AI. Here's how. In the piece, she warns of AI risks such as market dominance by large tech firms, collusion, and the potential for increased fraud and privacy violations. Now, they're not wrong about those concerns, but they are saying that we're committed to doing our part to uphold America's longstanding tradition of maintaining the open, fair, and competitive markets that have underpinned both breakthrough innovations and our nation's economic success without tolerating business models or practices involving the mass exploitation of their users. Khan made a point of noting that AI represents nothing special in the eyes of the law. Although these tools are novel, they are not exempt from existing rules, she wrote, and the FTC will vigorously enforce the laws we are charged with administering, even in this new market. Okay, number one, the laws do not keep up with new technology. And number two, since when has the government been able to accurately regulate things like this, much less understand it? We've all seen Senate hearings and stuff where they talk about technology.
We have, but I also want to give us, I also want to talk here very, very clearly and say that there is an interest here in the government, preserving, things like this. I don't want to say, that all lawmakers are equal, because they're not. But there are also some really bright people here. Look at Lena Wen's, background. If anyone's capable of doing it, so is she. And so, I think of it from that perspective. As we go through this process, it's going to be very interesting to see what they propose. We should be proposing something.
I think that there are individuals who are very smart and capable. I think that when you take it as a whole, when you take the government as a whole, a little less agile and smart. Um, I'm just concerned when I read some of these quotes from this op ed. And, there are so many headlines I could have pulled about ChatGPT and AI and all of these things, and there's so much going on. Another headline I pulled was about Jeffrey Hinton from Google quitting so he can speak freely about the danger of AI, and that's a whole other topic because he's worried about potential risks and how it could go wrong with disinformation and it again, people using it to spread bad things and things like that. So there's a lot of hype, but there's also a lot of um, fear and misinformation out there. So I think we just have to proceed with caution. There's also the writers' strike that's going on in Hollywood right now because they are concerned about um, Hollywood studios using AI to basically generate basic scripts that then the writers would then edit. And the reason they're concerned about that is um, writers are paid less to edit scripts than they are to generate things from scratch.
Indeed.
So they are concerned about the studios trying to pay them less when they're already not well paid, when really everything on TV, in the movies, it's built on what writers do. You can't have a book or a script or anything without someone writing it. So they are the backbone of all of that. So they're striking to say, "Hey, you can't do this without us, so pay us, please." So there's a lot going on around AI right now. There was a really horribly so awful it was funny beer commercial. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was a play on a barbecue. People at a barbecue, backyard barbecue. And It was funny and dystopian and scary and awful, and yet makes you laugh too. So there's a lot going on in the AI world. And yeah, it's an interesting time right now. Very, very interesting. But by the way, couple other things really quickly. T-Mobile had a second data breach this year, leaking account pins and more. It wasn't a ton of people, only 836 subscribers, which doesn't sound like a lot unless you were one of those 836 people. And if you have TP-Link routers, make sure you patch them because there is an IoT botnet that is exploiting those, and you should definitely make sure you're patching. Patch. Anything good going on in the comments that I should know about? Because I have not been able to keep up because they are flying. Just a little bit.
Lots of great conversation as always.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I see David's comment about art being devalued from AI too. So yes. Yeah, and we are technically out of time. So but the good news is you can always come back and rewatch here or on YouTube. If you come and rewatch here, you can also go back through the comments and reread those. And even I think you can even still react to them later. So enjoy that. Again, next week, Silent Assist. The week after that, we're going to do, Sergey's going to be back with Android EMM. And then the week after that, Windows MDM. We've got a jam-packed month. Lots to do.
Yeah.
So excited.
It's a devices heavy month, but that's
It
okay.
is. It's good. It's Tom's team.
There you go.
Month long.
Happy Friday, everybody. Great to see everybody. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Have a
Thanks for the
great
time.
weekend. We'll see you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye all.